Hey out there. I'm at this meeting in Chico, California. This fellow, Guy McPherson, is supposed to speak. He is a believer in man-made climate change. And he's going to be giving a talk, and I'm going to get some of the footage from that. This is Friday, March 13th, 2015. And also attending this meeting are the Chico Skywatch group, which is an anti-chemical group. And we just happen to have Dane Wiggington came down here from up in the Redding area, Shasta County. And he's right over yonder, and we'll hope to hear from Dane Wiggington as well at this meeting. And maybe he and Guy McPherson will debate some of this man-made global warming theory, and maybe inject the idea that some of this warming is being caused deliberately by these chemtrailers and trying to frame humanity at large. Anyhow, I'm going to take a break until the meeting gets started here.
Thank you, Mimi. As Mimi indicated, we're moving into a new chapter of the whole extinction story. And as part of that transition, we're going to show a relatively short film, I think it's 25 minutes, that we shot just a couple of days ago. One of the videographers here in the crowd today. And there will be plenty of time for questions and answers afterwards. And again, I want to reiterate my thanks to all of the individuals who are here today, to everybody who helped make this happen, as well as to all of you for showing up, because this is not an easy subject to grapple with. And I get the question all the time, well, what am I supposed to do with this information? Like, why did you even tell me this, you horrible person? And I'm perfectly willing to admit that I'm a horrible person. In fact, I hear that regularly, so it must be true. I read it online. I saw it on Facebook earlier today, so it must be true. But why I do this is, if there's an asteroid coming and it's going to hit the planet, and therefore, in very short order, remove all habitat for humans on this planet, I want to know. I want to know exactly when that asteroid is going to hit, so that I can be out there staring at it when it hits. Your mileage may vary. And I've heard about people who have gone away from one of my presentations and they get in the taxi cab and they start telling the whole story. And the taxi driver is like, you can get out here. You don't owe me a thing. I don't want to hear this story. So you might start, if you want to transmit this information to other people, you might start with the asteroid story and ask them if they want to know if the asteroid is coming. Because some people don't want to know. You know, they like their lives. They don't want to continue what they're doing. And if they die tomorrow of a heart attack, they die tomorrow of a heart attack. And they don't need to know that. So that's okay too. Okay, with that as a rambling introduction to the film, we can just start the film, and I'll be available in 25 minutes from now to answer any questions that might be at the university several years ago, and I've subsequently been pursuing the topic of abrupt climate change. I've studied climate change for the last 30 years or so, and only within the last few years have delved into the topic of abrupt climate change, which is a completely different animal than the slow, linear change with which most of us are familiar. I'm going to start by talking about the current state of the situation, dating back to the Intergovernmental Panel Climate Changes. I'm going to start by providing a little background information, beginning with one of the more conservative bodies on the planet, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is one of the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet. In their recent vaunted fifth assessment, which was heavily leaked in late 2013 and officially released in 2014, they concluded that global warming is irreversible in the absence of massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry. So even the most conservative conservative scientific body, one of the most conservative scientific bodies on the planet, considers that we have to do something such as geoengineering to reverse ongoing climate change. Truth Out correctly reports on that conclusion by the IPCC in April of 2014 with the headline, Intergovernmental Climate Report Leaves Hopes Hanging on Fantasy Technology, because Truth Out had gone through the literature and discovered that geoengineering was in fact fantasy technology. 2 days later, in Time magazine, the chief of NASA points out that humanity's future depends upon a mission to Mars, and he specifically indicated 2030 as the year Earth will no longer support humans because of lack of habitat. Elon Musk subsequently doubled down on that projection and said, no, we have to be out of here by 2024 at the latest if humans are going to survive in this universe. What I'm going to walk through is the relatively short history of humans going into the future. And I'll start with a little cartoon. I hate the misogynistic nature of the history of man, but I'm going to stick with it for now. You see that the first panel indicates what the hell is happening as it ponders, and then the final frame is the end. It won't be long, in other words. And artists, comedians, those kinds of folks seem to grasp what's happening intuitively far better, in my opinion, than the scientific community has gotten to the notion. How could human extinction result from climate change? I'm often asked. After all, we are incredibly clever organisms. We adapt to a wide range of temperatures and other circumstances. But let's think for a moment. We've had no human on Earth at temperatures 3.3 degrees centigrade or higher above baseline at any point in the past. The genus Homo appeared about 2.8 million years ago, and during 2.8 million years, the warmest temperature humans have experienced is about 3.2 degrees centigrade above baseline. And that event was relatively slow in terms of its temperature rise, as contrasted with where we're at today. Baseline is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or approximately 1750. So we say a temperature above baseline of 3.2 or 3.3 C. We're talking about the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We're headed for more than 3.5 degrees above centigrade in the very near future. And given the rapid rise in temperature ahead of us, and that has already begun, it's difficult for me to imagine the habitat for humans on the planet. So this whole story, really, the near-term human extinction story, is about loss of habitat, the absence of habitat for humans. Not that we're not clever, not from our ability to adapt to ongoing changes, but because plants and animals won't be able to adapt. We are human animals. We are Homo sapiens, the self-proclaimed wise apes. And as animals, we depend upon a living planet for our own survival. Already, according to the referee journal literature, climate change is proceeding 10,000 times faster than other organisms can keep up, than evolution by natural selection is capable of keeping up. And that's with the relatively slow, linear change in climate we've observed so far. We've just begun rapid climate change, this phase of abrupt climate change. And so I see no way for organisms to keep up with the rapid change in climate that's ahead of us. Plants are unable to move that rapidly, and if they could move the microbes in the soil that they depend upon can't move that rapidly, and so on. There's all sorts of features associated with habitat that get in the way with our cleverness, our ability to just pick up and move to a different place. How quickly could human extinction occur? Well, the collapse of industrial civilization. We know that we can't maintain the unmaintainable, can't sustain the unsustainable indefinitely, and civilization by its nature is unsustainable. Collapse of industrial civilization, according to a paper by James Dane and colleagues in December 2011, takes us to 1.2 C plus or minus 0.2 C above the current temperature. So we're currently at 0.85 degrees centigrade above baseline. 1.2 more takes us to the vaunted 2.05 degrees centigrade. Well, there have been two subsequent papers following up on that paper by Hansen and colleagues, also published in reference journal literature,
indicating the very conservative nature of that atmospheric chemistry and physics paper in December 2011. So I think it's safe and probably still conservative to conclude that collapse of industrial civilization taxon 1.4c, at 1.2 plus 0.2, the upper end of the range forecast by Hansen and Cummings. So that takes us to 0.85 plus 1.4 is 2.25, if I'm doing the math right, above baseline, or the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Another artifact associated with the collapse of industrial civilization is that we will observe the catastrophic meltdown of the world's 400 and change nuclear power plants. What that means is that the spent fuel rods currently housed in ponds, cooling ponds, will be exposed to the air because there will be no grid-tied electricity pumping water up to those ponds. So the ponds will drain, spent fuel rods will be exposed to the air, they will consequently explode, and we will have nuclear fires in some 1,200 of those ponds that will scatter ionizing radiation and produce the kinds of fires that this planet has never seen. It takes up to 60 years to decommission a single nuclear power plant if the money is available. It's difficult for me to imagine this living arrangements being maintained for another few years, much less for another 60 years. And nobody's working on decommissioning the power plants anyway. The politicians are currently working on commissioning more because of our addiction to boiling water. If we observe the collapse of industrial civilization, or even if we don't, we could observe an open water event in the Arctic Ocean this year. One of the consequences of that open water event is likely to include a 50 gigaton burst of methane emerging from the Arctic Ocean. According to Natalia Shkova, who has conducted research on methane in the Arctic Ocean for many years, has conducted field observations, that 50 gigaton burst of methane is, quote, highly likely at any time, or highly possible at any time. Well, when we have an open water event in the Arctic Ocean, I see very little that will keep the ocean capped, that will allow that methane to stay trapped beneath the Arctic Ocean. If we observe catastrophic rapid warming as a result of the collapse of industrial civilization, or even if we don't, I suspect in the not too distant future we'll see an open water event, and as a consequence, we'll see a 50 gigaton burst of methane come from the Arctic Ocean. That's conservatively will add an additional 1.3 degrees centigrade to the current global average temperature. It'll take about a year for that to manifest because it takes about a year for methane to circulate all around the globe. So the methane will emerge from beneath the Arctic Ocean in this tremendous burst, and the warming will be localized to begin with, then regional, then will spread throughout the globe, so that we will have 0.85 degrees above centigrade, which is 0.85 C above baseline, which is where we're at now, plus the 1.4 produced when civilization collapses, and the sulfates fall out of the atmosphere and are not being added into the atmosphere by burning coal and other fossil fuels. And then we add an additional 1.3 with the burst of methane that is highly possible at any time. And we're looking at 3.55 C above baseline in the not too distant future. That's a third of a degree above the temperature at which humans have ever persisted on this planet, with more than 3/4 of the change occurring within the next 18 months or so. And climate change is happening so quickly now that evolution by natural selection can't keep up for almost any organism on the planet. When we start talking about a very rapid rise, including 2.7 C tacked onto the 0.85 C we've got already, I see no way for a vast majority of the organisms on the planet to keep up with the habitat and for the habitat to proceed that allows our species to persist. Methane is the elephant in the room. It has been ignored by all of the major bodies that have studied climate change. The most recent assessment comes from the very conservative International Energy Agency, which in May of 2014 concluded that we're headed for a temperature rise up to 6 C above baseline, not taking into account methane. not taking into account the many self-reinforcing feedback loops we triggered, taking into account only emissions of carbon dioxide. All previous assessments have been eclipsed by subsequent ones, indicating that the conservative nature of those assessments continues. So if business as usual takes us to 6 C above baseline by 2050, and then we just tack on methane, and that increase in temperature comes even sooner,